because a lot of this is already written on there for you. I'll give you a little insight on a few of them, and we're gonna move on. No particular questions. How many's actually worked on it? All right, 4.5 of them. Congratulations. Well, the first one's self-explanatory. Meiosis, reduction division, reduces number of chromosomes from diploid to haploid. What else happens with meiosis? If it's reduction division, it all doubles the number of cells as well as reduces the number of chromosomes. So keep all that in mind. Second one explains itself. Third one, these are just terms. And this test has a lot of terms on it. You have to understand terminology to understand genetics. So you need to know definitions of those terms. Number 4, an egg would have 22 body cells or somatic cells and 1 X chromosome. That'd be the 23rd one. Sperm would have 22 body chromosomes or what's called somatic cells and 1 Y or 1 X, wouldn't it? Sperm's either X or Y, right? The father determines sex of the child. Number 5, nucleotide. We know our components of that, sugars, base, phosphates. They are the building blocks of nucleic acids. A mutation is a change in DNA. Mendel's standard phenotypic ratios, and these are heterozygous phenotypic ratios. Monohybrid 3:1, dihybrid 9:3:1. If I ask you what Mendel's standard genotypic monohybrid ratio, what would it be? Say that again. 1:2:1. You said 2:1. 1:2:1. 1:2:1. You were hung up on the yellow mice where one died, I think, on that wrong. Where's most sex-linked information carried? On the X chromosome. Is there any on the Y? Oh, there is. Pair of years in men. That's what we all been dreaming about for 2 weeks now. Any of y'all woke up in the middle of the night dreaming of pair of years? Hey, that's good. I hadn't totally ruined your life then. Alleles deal with the same trait but different expressions. You gotta have an allele from each parent, don't you? Does it have to be different expressions? Doesn't, does it? You could get a big T from both mom and dad, couldn't you? Or a little T from both mom and dad? Monohybrid problems, you're gonna have a couple of problems on the test that are be something like brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. We have 2 heterozygous brown-eyed parents. What's the chances of them having a blue-eyed child? 3:1 would be your phenotypic ratio, brown to blue. So what's the chances of getting a blue-eyed child? 25%? That's all it is. Shouldn't you be playing softball today? They left you home?
I decided I'm probably leaving next semester, so
Maybe you need to be the mascot.
maybe so.
It was that mean old coach, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Evil. A and T and C and G, not C and 6. I figured that would confuse somebody. Little typo there. We know how to match those up? I hope so. Codon, 3 bases is triplet code. Messenger RNA carries the codon. Transfer RNA carries the anticodon. And then everything else comes off that chapter 37 study guide. Biome based on plant distribution. Coniferous forest adapted for long, cold, snowy winters. What kind of trees you find in coniferous forest?
Fir spruce.
Thank you very much. That's what I was gonna say, because that's what we remember, won't it? Yeah, pines and furry spruce. You remember that on little typo, but we'll remember it now because it's a furry spruce. I'd like to see one of those trees, wouldn't you, Darren?
It'd be different.
We'd sell it. We'd make money off of it somehow. You'd shave the hair off of it, sell the hair.
Make coats out of it.
Do what?
So you can make coats out of it.
Absolutely. That's why they're made for long, cold, snowy winters. They got hair on them. I know, it's cold already. It's been one of those days. Greenhouse effect, accumulation of CO2 because of burning of fossil fuels. Autotrophs, heterotrophs, definition, niche is your profession. Earth suitable to live because of life-sustaining supply of energy from the sun. We already noted it as our major source of energy. So no basic components of temperate deciduous forest, which would be where we live, right? Coniferous forest, those long, cold, snowy winters. Tropical forest has the greatest variety of plants and animals. Grassland, humans have pretty much destroyed it, but there's enough rainfall to support grass, but not enough to support trees, is what it says. Tundra, short growing season, dwarf woody plants at best. Possibly their state bird in the tundra would be a mosquito, and then we figured that one out in Alaska. And then desert, of course, animals have nocturnal habits, plants conserve water very well. And then definitions of ecosystem, ecology, secondary consumers, nitrogen fixtures, those we said were legumes, beans, peas, clover, alfalfa. What did we cross in a test cross? We crossed an unknown plant with what?
Homologous recessive.
Homozygous recessive. And then know your translation, replication, transcription. What is a retrovirus? Couldn't find it? I usually have talked about it at some point, sometimes even early in the lecture, like on the first lecture for the first test. A retrovirus is a virus that is controlled by RNA. And if it's controlled by RNA does not have a check system like DNA does. DNA prevents a lot of mutations because it checks itself. RNA has a very bad attitude. It can make itself, it can run the show, but it's not very organized in the way it does it. So viruses that are retroviruses, those are not good viruses. AIDS is a retrovirus. And at last time and I thought that was enough, I don't even need to keep up with it because this is kind of depressing. At last count, the AIDS virus, still causing the same problems, still the AIDS virus, had mutated 13 times in 1 year. We cannot make a vaccine that fast. It takes 5 years to get FDA approval on a vaccine. So vaccines are out of the question with retroviruses. So they kind of have a mind of their own. Any questions there?
How do
Okay.
they change so much and still cause all the same?
That's a good question. I'm sure they're utilizing part of that big margin for error we talked about in the DNA process, where it's still the same, yet the code is slightly different. They're thriving off that primarily. But, oh yeah, but they don't care if they make mistakes. It's like, I'll fix it next time with no intentions of ever fixing anything. But still that's pretty amazing that they can do that. They can still cause the same problems, wreak the same havoc, and may be slightly different genetically every time. All right, that brings us to your notes. You should have a chapter 9 and 10 notes. Hands up and running here. This is starting test 3, which we know it covers a lot of chapters. It's long. But I think this gives you a good example of how much of the chapters we tend to cover. We tend to hit the highlights as we go. So you should have, as soon as that counts down, a set of notes. And this first chapter 9 is basically talking about tissues. And the thing at the very end of this chapter, it talks about size of animals and efficiency. And let me just give you a general rule, because at this point we have to use a lot of general rules. In chapter 10 or 11, we will use a lot of general rules. Here's a general rule for the end of chapter 9 when it talks about size and efficiency. The larger the animal, the more complex and the more efficient they are. The larger, in fact, the very last page of chapter 9 is where it talks about it. And it'll tell you, the larger the animal, the more complex, the more efficient. If you think about it, if we have an elephant sitting here, and we have a mouse sitting over here, which one This is a no-brainer. Which one consumes the most food? The elephant. Which one consumes the most food per gram of body weight? The mouse. Which one would it be easier for to maintain a steady body temperature? If we found a refrigerator big enough to put an elephant in, would it take longer to cool the elephant off or the mouse? We could cool the mouse off really quick, couldn't we? So its body temperature is just, I mean, it's all we can do. That's a lot of energy involved to maintain it because it loses so much body temperature. It's like a swimming pool warms up faster than a lake, doesn't it? Look at the volume of water you're dealing with. So the larger the animal, the more complex, yet more efficient they are. And we'll talk about birds in a later chapter. And we have so many different sized birds. The turkey, for us, it's one of the larger birds we have around here. Heart rate is 93. What's ours? What's our heart rate? Depends on if I'm excited or not, huh?
Like 60 to 80, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 70, 75, depends on what book you read, but if it's 65, you're fine. If you're 80, you're probably fine, So that turkey's not far from us, is it? Now, a chicken's temperature is 106, but turkey's probably not gonna be far from that, but chicken's a little smaller. Then you get down to even small birds. Anybody know what a black cap chickadee looks like? Holly, you laid your eyes on black cap chickadee. I can see your dad saying, Holly, that's a black cap chickadee. You know, it's like at that point in your life, that wasn't the most important thing in your life, but now it is, since I'm talking about it in class. This bird's not very big. I mean, it's a little bitty bird. You know, when this bird's resting, its resting heart rate is 500 beats a minute. I can't even fathom 500 beats a minute. So if we get this bird excited, he goes after some food or something, he's beating at 1,000 beats a minute. So if you could sneak up on it and go boo, you could kill it just like that. He cannot afford to skip a heartbeat. Yeah, we'll skip one every now and then. We thrive and survive at 70 beats a minute. Not this little black cat chickadee. He just tweeted his last tweet. So there's your efficiency and your size. Now look at the tissues, which we've already done in lab, so this is familiar. We don't spend a lot of time on this. We start with the four types of tissues, which we know each organ of the body must have at least 2 of these tissues to be an organ. Most all your organs have at least 4. Or most all your organs have 4. You have to have at least 2. Epithelial. Well, simple squamous you're familiar with because we scraped it out of your cheek, right? Stained it in class, and boy, that was a fun deal. It's better than the slide. Y'all did a better job than the slide we looked at. So now there's different kinds. There's columnar. We found columnar, respiratory tract, digestive tract. There's a cuboidal found in the kidneys. Stratified is your skin. And stratified is multi-layered. So any place that's abusive, your feet, your hands, any places that are abused, you'll find stratified. It's there for protection and filtration, makes up glands and lines cavities of the vessels. So that's where you, if you had one word to kind of summarize what epithelial tissue does, it protects somehow, some way, somewhere. Second tissue is connective tissue. You have bone, blood, lymph, areolar, tendons, ligaments, cartilage. We looked at a lot of these in lab. Kind of got a good idea that they all have some kind of matrix. If it's blood, it's a liquid matrix. If it's bone, it's obviously a solid matrix. Nervous tissue, the neuron is the functional unit of nerve tissue. There's 3 major parts. There's cell bodies, dendrites, and axons. Cell bodies, dendrites, and axons. And of course, the dendrite takes information to the cell body, axons away from the cell body. Chapter 33, I think we'll talk a lot more about that, which is the last test of semester, so it's on down the road. Number 4, muscle. Here's your smooth skeletal and cardiac. Smooth is involuntary. It is not striated. That's why they call it smooth. Skeletal is voluntary and striated. And of course, cardiac is involuntary and striated. And skeletal, we can go back and say it makes up as much as 40% of your body mass. So we could probably sit here and name off a few of those skeletal muscles: biceps, triceps, quadriceps, interceps. I don't think that's one, is it? Close enough, it was a set, wasn't it? All right, moving on to chapter 10. Chapter 10 is an introductory chapter to all these other chapters we're fixing to get into. And it gets into terminology, scientific naming and classifying. So a fellow by the name of Carlos Linnaeus, some people call him Linnaeus, I don't know what his name is, but it's something like that. He came up with our modern day classification system, our modern day scheme of classification. And he also went beyond that and got into the naming process, which we call the binomial nomenclature. That's a big term for saying he created two names for every little individual out there. Binomial two-name naming system is what that's saying. So if we look at his scheme down here, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, has anybody ever heard some saying that goes with that? Do what? Well, if I was ever taught one, I didn't remember it. I just have always memorized that. And somebody in class yesterday had a saying that was pretty good, that I don't remember it. But the ones I always remember was like the planets. I always remember the planet, like my very elegant mother just sat upon 9 porcupines. And then they screwed up all the planets, and now they don't even work for the planets anymore, because apparently one of the planets is not a planet, it's a moon, and it circles a planet that we couldn't see till now, and it's way out there. So I just stay away from GPS and forget that saying. Now, back to the good stuff. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Now we have subphylums, subclasses, suborders, subfamilies, subspecies. We even go as far as that. Some of these animals showed symptoms of plant-like activity as well as animal-like activity. And so botanists said, like a euglena has chlorophyll in it. So botanists say it has chlorophyll, that's gotta be a plant. All plants have chlorophyll, right? And zoologists said, I don't see plants moving around in the water like that. If you watch plants grow, you'll die of old age watching them grow. That's how slow they move around. So they got this big fight. To the extent that it created a lot of division between botanists and zoologists fighting over these little animals. Because at one time we only had a plant kingdom and an animal kingdom, that was it. So they had to go on one of them. So they fought over this. If you ever take botany and you're taught this hierarchical system, botanists won't use the term phylum, they'll use the term division. Why, I cannot explain, except that I think botanists smoke a lot of stuff. I really think they do. They're a different breed for sure. But if you look down at the bottom of that, Whitaker has a 5-kingdom system. His 5-kingdom system are animals and plants, of course. And then we have protist, protista, which is, we're getting into that in the next chapter, 11. And then fungi and Monera. Well, the zoologist wanted the protist in the animal kingdom. The botanist wanted some of them in the animal kingdom, but the ones with chlorophyll in the plant kingdom. So that was all the division thing. So we just created a kingdom for themselves and said, put them in there. The fungi was in the plant kingdom and had no characteristics of all of the plant. Nothing. So we created a fungi kingdom, and Monera is where we dumped everything else, we didn't know where it goes. So remember earlier in the notes we talked about eukaryotes and prokaryotes? Okay. The first 4 are eukaryotes. And the last ones, where we just dumped all prokaryotes in it. Had to have a dumping ground somewhere. So Monera is bacteria and blue-green algae. Some of y'all will go on and take microbiology. Well, you'll spend a lot of time in the prokaryotes and microbiology, because they spend a lot of time with bacteria, looking at them, see what they do, how they mature, how they replicate, their makeup. That's a lot of it, just how they're made. Where in these 5 kingdoms would you place a virus? In the animal? Well, I've got a lot of this deer in the headlight look out here today. No other suggestions? You only have 5 choices, and today it's free. You won't fail today if you choose the wrong one. I'm not gonna fail him because animals is not the place. So now you have 4 choices. But I appreciate the effort. What?
Produce?
That's not a bad choice. But now the rest of you have 3 choices because it's wrong. Thank you very much. I'm glad you dropped that softball so I can get that answer. The last one, you know, it makes sense. It makes sense because that's our dumping ground, right? Everything that really don't fit anywhere else, we just dump it in there. But the truth is, it doesn't fit any of it. The virus is not a living entity on its own. It must have a host cell of a living entity to survive. You throw it out there on the floor by itself, it's not gonna survive, it'll die. But you put it in an animal and it finds a host cell, then it's on a roll. It's not alive by itself. It doesn't fit any of them. So that was a trick question. And that's all the trick questions you'll get from me this year. Y'all believe that? Can't believe it. All right, so binomial nomenclature. What Carlos Linnaeus did was take the genus and the species and make that the name of the individual. Now, the genus can remain the same. If you take all cats will start with the genus Felis. No matter what kind of cat it is. If it's a house cat, it's Felis domesticus. But if it's some bobcat or cougar mountain lion being the same thing, or some cat in Africa, whether it be a lion or whatever, that species name will change. See what I'm saying? So if it's a cat, the genus stays the same. It's like, I know just enough botany to make y'all think I've been smoking something probably, but all oak leaves, all oak trees, there's a cajillion different kinds of oaks out there. But all oaks have the genus Quercus. If it's a post oak, it's Quercus stellata. If it's a water oak, it's Quercus nigra. If it's a red oak, it's Quercus rubra. And the reason is, all this Latin terminology, whether animals or plants, it's all based off Latin terminology. So if we need to call somebody else across the world and say, what have you studied on this? And we blah, 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 the same language is universal, it's Latin. Now, it's pig Latin to us, right? I mean, why can't we just use English? But in Latin, rubra means red. In Latin, nigra means water. Now this one I've not figured out, I'm not this good, but a chinkapin oak is Quercus merlinbugai. I can't spell it, and I don't know what that means whatsoever. But you'll run across those all the time. A pin oak, Quercus palustris. I'm not really sure about that one either, but in Latin, I bet it means something. So I'm glad I narrowed that down for you. So there's a lot of technical issues out there, but I hope I made my point on the genus and species. So we look over here, and we look at Rana pipiens. First name up here. Rana pipiens is the frog that we're going to dissect in the lab in a couple of weeks. Rana pipiens. So instead of going around saying we're going to dissect a frog today, so we're going to dissect us a Rana pipiens today. Where are you going to catch that? I'm going to get out of a bucket. That's where we're going to get it. And then the Drosophila melanogaster. If a doctor told me something about the Drosophila melanogaster at one time, I said, how long do I have to live? Now that I know what it is, it's a fruit fly. Well, they're irritating little things, aren't they? Buy you a bag of bananas and see how long it takes them to hatch out and attack you. Boy, that tasted good. Drosophila melanogaster. One thing that's going to be on the test that y'all need to know is how to recognize a properly written scientific name. Now, do you have to know what that name is in reference to? No. In fact, I'll probably make something up that doesn't exist. That would be just like me with it. But to recognize a properly written scientific name, the rule says that the genus must be capitalized and the species not, and both underlined.
First letter with a whole word capitalized.
First letter. Yeah, the genus must be capitalized, the species not, and underline both. And so you're gonna have 4 choices there, and you're gonna pick the one that has the first name capitalized, the second one not, and both are underlined. Now, how hard can that be? It's not hard. Now, they have upgraded that technology a little bit to modern computers, and so you don't have to underline them if you have the ability to italicize. So it's a difference in writing it out and now typing it out on a computer. So you can just italicize, you don't have to underline. But of course, I'm gonna have the underlined version on the test, because I came from 1910. Okay, the first two are written properly. This one was not, but now it is. That one is written properly. There's that first one, the Cervus elaphus is an elk, and a Dacilius virginianus is a white-tailed deer. Just a couple I looked up, thought I'd throw something out there we might be. So next time you say deer, say virginianus. They'll turn around and shoot you instead of deer, won't they? Shut that up. You know, every now and then it's even funny to act smart. We may not be very smart, but you throw something like that out there and you just made somebody's day. Think about that. How smart you got. What'd you learn in Mr. One's class? Not much, but that white-tailed deer has some kind of Virginianus name. Around here, they're about that big and alive within a few minutes. It'd be Dacilius virginianus, because there's so many poachers around here. So they're gonna add that to that as they die. Any questions over chapter 10? This is just an introductory chapter to what we're fixing to get into. So what would be a Felis domesticus? House cat, all right. Let me think of another one here. I was on a roll yesterday for a little while on some of these. One animal would be represented by the terminology bovine.
Cows.
Cattle. What about equine?
Horses.
Swine.
Pigs.
I'm glad you didn't say your neighbor. I've heard that reference before toward me. Of course, feline, canine, dog. I heard a new one yesterday, and now I can't remember it because it didn't make any sense. But they're the dumbest animal on earth. What is the terminology for sheep? It starts with an O. Well, that would be a cattleman's terminology for sheep. Grass maggots. You know why there's not many sheep ranchers? Because the cattlemen hung them all back in the day. What's some more, Holly? Name another animal. Come on, farm girl, help me out. But all these terms are equivalent to animals that we're familiar with in most cases, but based off Latin terminology. This is chapter 11. Chapter 11 gets into protozoans. The whole chapter is over protozoans. And this is a long chapter. I mean, if you take your book and turn to chapter 11 and start looking at this chapter, it's like, holy cow, where does this thing end? And there's a lot to say about protozoans, but a lot of what they say is repetitive. So I've tried to put it all in a nutshell. And this book does not do a very good job organizing this chapter. The older book did a much better job. You know, we got 2 or 3 of the same authors in this book and the older book. They just created chaos in this chapter. So the protozoans are categorized according to the way they move, whether they have cilia, flagella, or pseudopodia. That's how that they're organized. Just like we know if it's a bird, it has feathers. Okay? If it's a single cell animal and it has flagella, then it fits in the flatulence. If it has cilia, it fits in the cilia. That's how we know. They have to pick a feature to make it what it is, to put it where it is. So some general rules of all these animals, and these general rules float through a lot of these chapters we're fixing to get into, because there's several parasitic chapters we're going to get into in the next week or so, internal and external parasites, that these work in as well. Eating habits, Holozoic or phagocytic basically engulf their food whole. There's always exceptions to the rules though, and occasionally we'll point out some really neat exceptions that I may ask a question about, but most of the questions I'll ask will be across the board general, okay? Holozoic or phagocytic, some are saprozoic, there's kind of an exception, and that's absorbing their food. There are some like that. Some can be heterotrophic, which is gonna be holozoic, phagocytic, or saprozoic. They have to consume their food somehow. And then there's that handful that the botanists always wanted that are autotrophic, that can produce their own food because of chlorophyll. There's always Euglena, Volvix. Lab this week, we're probably gonna do lab 3 and 15 in your lab book, which 3 is the protozoans. Unfortunately, we don't have any in yet. We're getting them ordered. When they come in, we'll take a break of what we're doing, we'll pull those out, and we'll find real live living things. In this lab, we'll probably look at fixed slides. So in a way, it'll help us because when we start looking in the real things, when they zip across there, say, well, there it went. You'll recognize what you're looking at. Here, they're there and they can't go anywhere. So it'll be beneficial to us. And then, of course, lab 15 goes along with really lab 30, or chapter 37 in your text, ecology lab. Excretion and osmoregulation, contractile vacuole. This is how they deal with, they have too much water, they get rid of it. They don't have enough water, they conserve it, all by way of contractile vacuole. And this covers a lot of different animals, but it sure enough covers these. And then we have reproduction by binary fission. Man, this one works for a lot of chapters coming up for sure, especially the worms and the endoparasites and the variety of animals we're gonna be talking about before we even get to the vertebrates. All these invertebrates, a lot of them fit this. And binary fission, when in doubt, if you ask general reproduction, just put binary fission, it's a good choice. We can argue that one. Now, does that mean that these single cell animals cannot sexually reproduce? Is that what that means? Up to a few years ago, they thought it was asexual or nothing. Up to a few years ago, they caught them in the act. Sexual reproduction. You know what triggered it though? Stressful times. When they felt like the species was being threatened, then they reverted back to a sexual form of reproduction where they used combinations of mom and dad's gametes to get the new offspring, which added diversity to the offspring and gave the species a greater chance of survival down the line. That's when they saw it. And that's the advantage we have with meiosis, with our sexual reproduction we have compared to producing a lot of little clones. You know people that you are glad they don't produce little clones, don't you? We don't need any more of those people, do we? That's probably what y'all think of me, but that's beside the point. All right, moving into the 3 phylums that I'm going to talk about in this chapter. There are other ones that they mentioned. These 3 I figure are fairly important, and they represent our ciliophora, flagellates, and whatever else down there at the bottom is just totally bad news. Ciliophora, the ciliates, example would be paramecium. And in your text, there is 2 things when we're talking about paramecium, and I won't mention this here so I don't miss it. Sometimes I forget to go look at the text. There's 2 types of nuclei in these paramecium. There is a macronuclei and a micronuclei. They serve 2 different purposes. The macronuclei deals straight with metabolism. Macronucleus, metabolism. Micronuclei, reproduction. Micro reproduction, macro metabolism. And that is in your text, but finally it's like a needle in a haystack, but if you narrow it down to parameciums, you will find it in there, it's in bold print. Everything that fits in the ciliophora that are cousins to the paramecium, we cannot find them causing any humanistic problems whatsoever. Cilia can swim up your nose and out your ear and not cause you any problems whatsoever when you're out swimming around in lakes and streams. Now we get into Sarcomasticophora. Phylum Sarcomasticophora covers both amoeba and anything flagellated. Amoeba fits under its own little subphylum, Sarcodina. Now of all these animals, they're the largest. Size-wise, they're the largest. Now, amoeba can cause some problems. There's a lot of free-living amoeba that cause no problems at all, but there's 2 kinds of amoeba that can cause problems. First one listed here is amoeba histolytica. And that's the one, when they tell you don't drink the water, that they mean don't drink the water. This one gets in the intestinal system and wreaks some havoc, and you have the worst diarrhea. It can cause death if not gotten under control. You hadn't had diarrhea till you have this one attacking you from the inside out. Okay? Amoeba histolytica, not near as bad as the next one. This next one is a free-living amoeba that is fatal when you catch it. I doubt you're out there trying to catch it, but it's called Naegleria fowleri, is what it's called. That's the name of it, Naegleria fowleri. This amoeba lives in virtually every lake and stream in the United States. Everywhere they've ever tested for it, they found it. From the Great Lakes to as south as you can go. There's already been a case in Oklahoma this year where this has killed a person. There's been, this article I was just looking at right here was written in 2004. And it says right here, now I'm focused in. 23 people in the U.S. from 95 to 2004 have been killed by this little amoeba. 23. What happens, this amoeba's everywhere. It doesn't matter what time of the year you jump in the lake, you could come in contact with this amoeba. What happens is when lakes and streams get their lowest, usually this time of the year, would you agree? And they get their warmest, usually this time of the year, the numbers of amoeba have increased dramatically because as water started warming, they started reproducing. And now your chances of coming in contact with this amoeba is much higher than it was in early summer. The water volume's less, the amoeba number's up. It's like a 5-gallon bucket full of amoeba or a gallon bucket full of amoeba. Which one, the same number of amoeba in both, which one's more concentrated? The gallon bucket of amoeba. Most of this happens in southern United States where the waters get warmer and multiplication of the amoebas become increased. They will swim up your nose. They will find a nerve. They'll go to your brain. They'll create a migraine headache because they're eating your brain. And when they discover it, it's already too late. It wouldn't matter if they discovered it the moment they entered your brain. It's still too late, and they kill you. Bottom line. There's warnings across Oklahoma right now. Do not get out in lakes and streams, small pools of water, and swim because they're thriving quite well right now. Deeper water, probably less. You get in the shallow, really warm, balmy water with lots of debris, increased chances. Debris would give them a hiding place from direct sunlight. Warmness gives them a breeding ground that's unbelievable. So there's your case. That's one bad amoeba. The second category, subphylum, Mastigophora, are the zooflagellates. These are animal-like, flagellated, single-cell animals. They move by flagellum. A euglena could be an example of this. There's two I've picked here. Trypanosoma causes African sleeping sickness. The vector, what's a vector? The transmitter, the carrier. The vector is a tsetse fly. Oh, thank goodness we don't have any tsetse flies around here. But this tsetse fly bites you, gives you this little trypanosoma, this little single-cell organism, gets in your system and it causes African sleeping sickness. That's the kind of questions I'll ask on the test. Trypanosoma, African sleeping sickness, be able to match that kind of stuff up. Then trichomonas. Trichomonas is a sexually transmitted disease. And now how somebody gets it to start with, who knows? As far as the vector, I'm not exactly sure, but passed from person to person actually, or obviously through sexual contact, can cause sterility, can cause serious enough infections that major hospitalization. I don't remember exactly, either the male or female shows much fewer symptoms than the other. So without symptoms, a lot of times they don't even know they're carrying it, of course, then pass it on. See? So this is treatable once you find it. It is treatable. Hopefully the earlier you find it, the more treatable it is. But it is what it is. It is a sexually transmitted disease. And then there's another, category of phytoflagellates. We don't see any problems in the phytoflagellates, and these would be like euglena, because phyto is in reference to, chlorophyll and light producing our own food. So that's what you'd find in phytoflagellates, but not cause any problems. Then you have a third phylum called Apicomplexa. If you run across this phylum, this is bad news phylum, okay? There's not anything in this phylum that's good. That's how bad it is. The first group that I picked out here is Coccidia. Have you ever heard of coccidiosis? If you've ever dealt with animals at all, you have to have heard of coccidiosis. Especially if you've ever dealt with chickens, cattle, sheep, pigs, goats. It's carried by birds. Okay? It's pretty much airborne, but once one animal contracts it, then it can be waterborne, feedborne, feces-borne. They can pick it up. It's pretty contagious. It's easily treated once identified. For cattle, you can buy coccidiostats, add to the feed, and it prevents this. We add a lot of things to the feed, like Bovatec, which are ionospores that help promote rumen activity, that deters the activity of these organisms, and it'll almost nearly prevent it 100% of the time. But you can't feed a horse Bovatec, and I don't think you can even feed sheep or goats Bovatec. I don't think it. I think it'll kill them. But anyway, that coccidiosis, like I said, it is treatable though. Toxoplasma is a parasite that causes toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is an infectious disease that's probably the cause of a little better than 1% of mental retardation in humans in the United States. And we get it from cats. The old book, I love the explanation in the old book. The old book would simply say, pregnant women should not handle cats' litter boxes or eat raw meat. I don't know where they threw in that last part at, but I guess it's in reference to some crazy cravings. You know, if you see your pregnant wife in the kitchen eating the raw meat she's cutting up, you need to give her some help. The kids order driver is saying we still hatching it in the oven. Well, we ain't got it here yet. So, toxoplasmosis typically is in the feces of cats, but even if you don't handle the cat's litter boxes, what if the cat comes and rubs on your leg and you reach down and you pet it, and you didn't get your hand clean real well and you went back to cutting up that meat? Well, could some of this be on the fur or on the tail, or it could, couldn't it? So as you'll find throughout several chapters to come, a lot of our demise is because of poor hygiene. Poor hygiene in this case, you should have shot the cat a long time ago. I'm not a cat lover. I like cats, but I don't like lazy cats. Yeah. Keep the cat outside, make the cat live where it's supposed to live. Pregnant women, leave the cat alone. Make dad do something, let him feed the cat, right? If he don't, boot him out with the cat. Give him no food. All right, so there's toxoplasmosis. And then the last one we've heard of, Plasmodium parasite, malaria. What else? The vector of mosquitoes. What else mosquitoes carrying around these days? West Nile. I mean, it's starting to get a little bit rampant this year. It was bad a few years ago, and then they really predicted a bad year this year. So bad that what's Dallas doing? Dallas-Fort Worth area? They're putting out warnings at dusk, you best be in your house, or we're gonna spray you with chemicals. Yeah, don't be sitting outside enjoying a nice cool evening, you're fixing to get doused. Because they're spraying for these mosquitoes. They're trying to keep the mosquito population down, because there's been several cases of West Nile, and it's killed several in the older population. But this is not stuff to take lightly. And horses, any horse owners in here? They have a West Nile vaccine now, and have for several years, but it killed horses prior to getting that vaccine out there. So it is not to be taken lightly, and the fact that humans can get it too is even worse. I guess it's the only advantage of being in a drought is real how much water for mosquitoes to live in. But they're still out there.
They're down in Texas because I'm out.
The mosquitoes are dying out.
There's no water here, so they're trying to survive further south to get to the.
Well, I don't know. Beats me. I just know like old tires and stuff laying around, you really shouldn't leave them laying out because it gets in them and it's a nice little breeding ground for them. But let me add something to this. Is anybody in chapter 11? Just turn over. My hand's gonna turn very fast here. There it is. What page is that? 237. Turn to 237. And you see this mosquito biting this poor little innocent person on the arm. And you know, as I lecture through these classes, I make a lot of stuff up. And y'all don't know the difference. But I'm not making this up. That, just write right there in your book if you want to. Right there where that mosquito's biting that person's arm, just write female mosquito. It's only the female that sucks blood. And you can apply that to a lot of species of animals if you want to. What does the male mosquito do? Like any other typical male? Nothing. Sits around, drinks nectar, and probably wants her to bring it to him. Don't you figure? So, yeah, that's what the male mosquito does, is drink nectar. The female's out surviving for the whole family here, needs the nutrition of the blood to support the eggs that she's fixing to lay. And so when you slap that big mosquito on your arm that tried to take your arm, if you was in Alaska, it was the size of your arm, and there's just blood all over your arm, or that was probably your blood that it was sucking just straight out of you. That was the female mosquitoes you just killed. And no telling how many little ones you just killed killing that female. It is the female mosquito that sucks blood. And, you know, we could actually probably apply, I'm pretty sure that's gonna be a female tsetse fly. What do you think? Most likely, I'm saying. Well, there's a couple other ones we'll get into before we get through some of these chapters. Some of the vectors are there's black flies, the vector of a parasitic worm that causes elephantiasis. And I'm pretty sure that'd be a female black fly that's gonna carry that parasitic worm. So we can apply that to a lot of these mean little animals. That kind of helps summarize chapter 10. And if you will, look in that chapter. I'll turn this on for now. And I want to scan the chapter, make sure I didn't miss something. At the very beginning of the chapter of 11, it talks about mutualistic, where both partners benefit. That's a situation where two working together benefit. Commensalism, one partner benefits, the other one does not. It doesn't really affect the other one at all. And then parasitic, which some of the chapters we're fixing to get into after the test on Thursday, but we're going to see a lot of parasitism. Of course, the terms autotrophic and heterotrophic we're familiar with. There's where they talk about on 218 separating flagella, cilia, and pseudopodia. And 219 talk even more about it on 221 and 222. Here's where I come up on 225 when I come up with nutrition at the top. Holozoic. There it is, the very first sentence. On 226 is where the excretion osmoregulation regulation in the whole term. I'm trying to point out the fact I didn't make all this stuff up, it's actually in the book. Contractile vacuum, reproduction. Look at fission on reproduction on 226. What's the first black word underneath fission? Binary. Good choice. There's phylum Ciliophora. Don't cause many problems, but that's on 231 is where I pointed out macronucleus and micronucleus. You want to know the difference in those. On 235, phylum Apicomplexa, these are flagellates. These are flagellated single-cell animals. In fact, they fall under the phylum Dinoflagellata. Dinoflagellata, I believe is how it is, but everything under Apicomplexa is bad. And there's coccidiosis on 236, toxoplasma on 237. In that toxoplasma where it says such infection in the first trimester of women greatly increases the chances of birth defects in the baby. Perhaps 2% of all mental retardation in the U.S. results from congenital toxoplasmosis. Ladies, get rid of the cat. That's all I can say. Bring the cat back in later if you must have it, but get rid of the cat while you're pregnant. It's not worth it. On 238 is the Plasmodium parasite. Incubation period's about 6 to 15 days on the Plasmodium parasite. You know, that's some unique stuff here we can apply to the genetics we just got out of. The Plasmodium parasite needs functional hemoglobin to thrive in, okay? So, a person that carries a gene for sickle cell anemia, let's just say this, here's a normal hemoglobin, here's sickle cell anemia. The person with sickle cell anemia will never have malaria. They're gonna die younger because of sickle cell anemia and probably have a lot more pain. The person with normal hemoglobin has a great chance of getting malaria in countries that malaria is very prudent, popular, whatever. But they found resistance in genetics that have normal hemoglobin, yet a carrier for sickle cell anemia. Resistance in the malarial parasite just because of that genetics. So if we look at that, if we look at, let's just say, how we want to put this, sickle cell. Here is a normal heterozygous person crossed with a normal heterozygous person. Will they produce normal blood? Let's say that's normal blood. They'll produce two just like themselves, and this sickle cell offspring. This will never get malaria. This has a great chance of malaria. Which two is going to continue on thriving? The heterozygous ones, right? So they have discovered that in countries that malaria is very rampant, I guess you could say. They see a lot of that genetics right there. And that finishes chapter 11. That takes us to 14, Mark 14 in your text. To summarize up Thursday, we'll come here at 11, we'll take our test. Everybody gets finished with the test, we'll meander on up to the lab. We'll go up there and we'll do lab 3 and 15. And if you wanted to turn in the lab stuff in the lab, that'll be